Is this the moment you've been waiting for? Bill Maher just said something that's going to make a lot of people very angry as he lambasts what has become of the modern left and calls for a more old-school liberalism to be reclaimed from the woke intersectionality, resentment, and arrogance that seems to characterize the younger generation's idea of the left. You won't believe it until you see it, so subscribe to the channel and take a look at this clip before I tell you more about it.
You know, it's funny when I talk to, my friends around my age, 40, and they are always bitching to me about their kids who are like in their 20s, and they're like super uber woke, and they're driving their parents crazy. And everything is like, you don't get it, Mom. That's old thinking. And I'm like, don't get what? Abolish the police? Tear down statues of Lincoln? Maybe give communism another shot? Get rid of the border patrol? Get rid of capitalism? White supremacy has never been worse. Gender is always just a social construct. It's okay to have penises in the women's swimming pool in women's prisons. Okay, no, it's not that I'm old. It's that your ideas are stupid.
What a way to put it. I think Bill in recent times has found himself standing alone in the middle while the left abandons him and leaves him out in the cold in a rapid spiral away from the center. And what that's doing is eventually making someone like Bill Maher appear more centrist than he really is. But the truth is that a new crop of the younger generation inherits the traditional progressive left that was the forefront of things like the suffragist movement and the civil rights fight. It is infusing it with the same naive activism and rebellion that characterizes a charged young individual that sees so many problems in the world and yet no real solution. But of course there's a cost to that. It's not just the fact that the modern left is losing people like Bill Maher, but it also is leaving the space open for the most important role it has always had, which is to be the voice of the weak and voiceless. And the fact that it's been taken over by a resentful identity politics driven by a power game results in the people searching for anyone that can channel their grievances into public office rather than be preoccupied with foreign wars and globalist environmentalist agendas.
Why do people, because a lot of conservatives say to me, what you don't get about Trump is we don't like him either.
Right. Yeah, they just hate the other stuff more.
And I don't understand. I don't blame them because a lot of it is closer to their own home. Like the things you hate about Trump, democracy, I understand why that's the biggest issue, but a lot of people, it's kind of vague. Ukraine's very far away, but the stuff about family and race and gender, it's very close to their own home.
Yeah, and yet you could argue that it's the sort of the octogenarians who are really causing most of the problems at the moment. I mean, you're quite sort of tough on the millennials, but they have to deal with all these octogenarians who refuse to leave the stage, who've left them bankrupt, who've taken all their social security. So there is a lot of angst there.
Actually, the older people this time are for Biden.
Yeah.
And that's reflected in the fact that if you look at much of the polling data, you realize that Americans, broadly speaking, are pretty dissatisfied with both of their choices for U.S. presidents moving forward. And that's what recent data from places like Pew Research as well as Ipsos reveals, with voters wishing they could switch both candidates for someone better. But people in the Democratic quarter that deride and denigrate Trump voters as either unintelligent or racist just don't get the point. Thankfully, Bill Maher isn't one of them, but people that do think in that manner miss the fact that it's the failure of both parties to offer viable solutions that allows the rise of a populist like Donald Trump. And that failure comes not just from inaction, but by being painfully out of touch with the priority for most Americans. Now, let me give you an example of far-left policy positions that characterize the modern Democratic Party, far from the classical and old-school liberal worldview it started from. If you read the 2020 Democratic Party platform, you see it peppered with far-left positions on issues like race and gender that just aren't commensurate with much of the American public. Now, it speaks about the debate around trans bathrooms and sports teams by saying, and I quote, "We will work to ensure LGBTQ+ people are not discriminated against when seeking to adopt or foster children, protect LGBTQ children from bullying and assault, and guarantee transgender students access to facilities based on their gender identity." And on a sensitive issue like racial politics, the party platform adopts a race-tinted worldview where things like BLM, CRT, affirmative action policies, and even reparations are mentioned, saying, and I quote, "We believe Black Lives Matter and will establish a national commission to examine the lasting economic effects of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and racially discriminatory federal policies on income, wealth, educational, health, and employment outcomes to pursue truth and promote racial healing, and to study reparations." And by the way, that's part of the messaging for modern Democratic messaging. It says 5 agreeable things on something like race and embeds a far-left policy position in hopes that it goes unnoticed. But over time, it's impossible not to notice it, and when you've been observing the party for over 4 decades like Bill Maher has, you realize how far it has really come from the credentials that used to define it.
Yeah, so in one of your I mean, I just love this book. The book is so hysterical. It's going to be read like the I Ching, where you just sort of open it at any place, and it just starts to make you laugh and give you the advice you need. So in one of your more withering riffs in the book, you said that America is at peak stupid, right?
Peak stupid, yes.
Peak stupid, right. So give us the short version of why America right now is peak stupid.
Well, I would say it's because we stopped educating people. I mean, one of the issues I have with the left is that they, a lot of ignorance. I mean, people say to me all the time, you make fun of the left more than you used to. Yeah, because they're dumber than they used to be. And the right has gotten dumber too.
Can't argue with that. I mean, all you need to do is look at the two options that our collective politics have been able to produce as presidential candidates to understand how. But the silver lining is that it may be a changing trend. That's been too many events in the last few years that have disturbed the balance of global peace and awakened people from a non-political slumber. It's not just things like the pandemic that expose just how fragile our global economy, health systems, and supply chains are, but also the multiple wars that have alerted them to start preparing for the fallout on their lives. While all of that happens, perhaps the country and its people have to go through some more hard times to come out smarter on the other end. And part of that is how we've gotten into this trouble in the first place, is both sides of the political spectrum abandoning the center, except that its scale and impact is felt much larger from the political left when you look at things like the media, Hollywood, education system, and Silicon Valley.
I'm gonna go where the funny is as a comedian, but that doesn't make me a Republican. They went nuttier, the left, and then they blame me for noticing it. If I notice how unproductive it is to make everything about identity politics, that doesn't make me a Republican, it makes me an honest broker. If I notice all the oversensitivity and the cancel culture and the victim culture and the pointless white self-loathing and all this kind of, forcing complex ideas about race and gender on kids who can't spell yet. If I notice all that, it doesn't make me a Republican. I would never be a Republican for all the reasons I never have been.
And you don't have to be, but perhaps Bill Maher at least is noticing the excesses of the modern left is enough to make him fall out of favor with that strand. It's no wonder then how he'd be called right-wing by some news outlets in recent times, prompting him to shoot back at characterizations like that. For Bill Maher, it's not him that's moving to the right, but the ground from underneath him that's moving further to the left. And the easiest way to prove that is to look at some of the policy positions in the party that would be fringe a few decades ago and ask yourself what would truly be a more far-left position if not this. You realize that things like limitless gender, self-identity, reverse racism, socialism, and globalist environmentalism, at the cost of national interests, are about as far as you can go in the direction. And those are things that have become dangerously mainstream, alienating too many people in the process. But let me know in the comments if you feel the same way and whether Bill Maher is really the right avatar for what a true old school liberal would look like.